Okay, so far so good. So let's just start over here on this side. My daughter Maya is 16. Then, of course, that's me. My little boy Drew is 8. My husband Nathan, and then next to Nathan is Rachel. She's 14, and then Lincoln is 11. So you're going to be learning a lot about each of these little people, all for our time together today. I am going to be talking to you about how we can protect our families, and especially our children, from sexual addiction and from pornography. All right, so first of all, the question then we have to ask ourselves is, why do we need to start so early? Before I was sort of into this field, it seemed a little young to be exposing our 6- and 7-year-old children to something like this. It almost felt like exposing them to something that, like, I was actually teaching them about something that I'd rather they not know about, right? It's like, I don't even know if I want to talk about that. Well, the fact of the matter is, if you look at some of the statistics, the average age for first exposure to pornography is 9. And under some studies, the average age is actually being found to be 7. So we can't start early enough with our children, talking to them. Definitely by 7 or 8. That is not too late or too early. The largest consumer group of those who look at porn is 12 to 17. 80% of 8 to 16-year-olds have seen it. Now, that doesn't mean they're seeking it, but they run into it. And that, as parents, is what we need to be aware of, is that they're not looking. Oftentimes, and we'll talk a little bit about this later as the day goes on, they're not out there looking for it necessarily, but it's their pop-up ads, their friends are it's something that they're going to be running into. And then the final one is childhood exposure is a stronger factor in sexual addiction than even sexual abuse. So a lot of it just has to do with, and I definitely have seen this with the adolescents, and I work with a lot of adolescents that struggle with sexual addiction. A lot of it is just they were exposed to it. They saw it. A friend showed it to them. It was in an uncle's house or whatever. So it's just there. And so we need to be aware that it's out there. And so my whole thing today is being on the offense. I want to talk about how we need to be offensive. In other words, when we're parenting, and in the church even too, I think it's important to realize that we can do two things. We can wait and do sort of the downstream work of dealing with what has happened, or we can get in front of it. And I think in our culture today, we don't have a choice, okay? Because this is too big of a deal, it's too important, and it's too dangerous to sort of deal with the aftermath of what happens, because our society is being sort of swamped with this content, and as parents, we have to be on the offense. We do not want to let the media teach our children about sex. We do not want to let their friends or even the schools sometimes teach them. We have to be willing and competent to be able to have good conversations with our children. So that's what today is all about. I want to start with talking to our young children about it, then move on to how to help our adolescent children, and then I want to spend just a second talking about how we, as church communities, can be more on the offense rather than sort of fearful of this subject and hope it doesn't happen. I think sometimes we feel like if we just don't talk about it, it's not happening. We all know that's like the height of ignorance, right? It is happening. Our kids are exposed to it. My middle school and high school daughters, I have a good relationship with them, and I am aware of what I'm sure I'm not wholly aware, but they are exposed to a lot of things that just really kind of scare me. And so I have to be really willing to have these conversations. So let's start, I want to start back with the brain. A child's brain is designed to imitate what it sees. Now, this is really, really important, and this is why we need to start talking to our children really, really early about what they are going to be seeing. It's not like if they see it, it's like when they see it, okay? So if you think about this, from the 3rd trimester of pregnancy through the 2nd year of life, the child's brain develops at such a rapid pace that it actually doubles in size. Okay, and what's going on there is little neural pathways in the brain are combining and connecting, like by the billions. And so there is a vast amount of growth and information that they are taking in, okay? So for the way God created the brain in order to sort of maximize its efficiency, we are very habit-forming creatures. Now, that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that fundamentally. If you want to think about this, think, if you will, about what it would be like and how much work it would be for you to have to relearn. So say you all drove to church today, right? If you had to really think hard about every step of maneuvering your vehicle to get to church, that would be exhausting, right? How many of you had like 3 seconds worth of thought around driving your car. Now, if you're with a 16-year-old, it's a different story, but let's assume we're not. We're just getting in our car. Was it hard? We've been doing this for a very long time. We turn the key, we pull the thing out, we look behind it. We do all of this essentially almost seemingly not thinking, right? We just do it. Our brains are trained to become very habit-forming because then we can really utilize the brain to do things that are hard, that we do have to spend a lot of time and energy on. So God created us to be able to really zone in on something, learn it quickly. It turns from, like, the way I like to think about it is like, oh, sorry, I'm supposed to stay here. So we start with like something that we're learning, and it's like a little dirt road, okay? And it's tough, and it's got ruts in it, and we're trying to struggle with it and learn it. I've just taught my 16-year-old how to drive, so, it's a struggle. It's hard on multiple levels. And then the dirt road, as we learn something, turns into more of like a little county road. And then it turns into a city road, and we pave it, okay? And that's how the brain works. The first time we do it, we're dirt pathing it. It's tough. Then it moves faster and faster and faster, and once we have really mastered a skill, like those of us who've driven cars for several years, it's like the Autobahn. It's a superhighway. It goes really fast, and we don't even have to think about it. That is what happens with the child's brain. It sees something, and it learns how to imitate it very, very quickly. All right? And the younger the child, the more quickly it learns. If you've ever tried to learn a second language as an older person, an adult, it's a lot harder. Younger children pick it up rapidly. Okay? Good. That's another good example. All right, so they imitate their parents, obviously. They imitate their friends. They certainly imitate what they see on the media. Their classmates, their teachers, we're just made for imitation, okay? Now, the next point I want to make is a child's brain has less of an ability to control the impulses that they imitate, okay? So when they are learning to imitate, especially at a young age, they are not necessarily equipped to discern if this is a good thing to be imitating or if it's a bad thing. The brain is just trained to do it. So I want to remind you back, I think I took you through this a week or two ago, where I'm going to use my hand as a brain. This is the brain stem here. All right? This brain stem started, it's the most primitive form of, like primitive animals have a brain stem. It's responsible for breathing, sleeping, eating, drinking, thirst, hunger, things like that. We don't have to think about what our brain stem's doing. It's just doing its thing, okay? Now, in a child, this is the second part. It's the second most advanced part. So we're working our way up. This is the limbic system. It's where our feelings are. We call it the feeling brain in my house, okay? It is what is developing rapidly in childhood. A child has a feeling brain, especially a right side of its feeling brain, from the moment it is born. That's why it responds to a mother's voice, to a father's touch. That's why it is gaining this sense of self from the moment it is born, because its feeling brain is learning and connecting. It's turning dirt paths into superhighways from its very earliest, youngest age, okay? The feeling brain is a big deal. And so as a child gets bigger, and if we're thinking about imitative behavior, it imitates things, and it has sort of like a gas pedal. It's like, go, go, go. I like that. That's good, all right? And so, but it doesn't really know how to discern good and bad. That's what moms and dads teach, and just developmentally, the brain doesn't really know how to do that. So as our children get older, it starts to develop the thinking brain, which is the front of the brain. It's our forehead, okay? The thinking brain is right behind the forehead. It is very immature as children. It's not even there as a young child, okay? And it is developing as time goes by. It is most developed, its optimal development happens in secure attachment, right? That is how the thinking brain becomes developed. So that's why all that we've been speaking of before, secure attachment, is key. But it is not mature at childhood. Even the most securely attached child does not have a fantastic thinking brain. When my children struggle, in my brain, I say, brain damage. My child is not thinking, but my child is not, my child is not equipped to think the way I want him or her to think because his or her brain is not quite there yet, okay? All right, so the thinking brain is essentially the brakes of the brain. We've got the feeling brain that sees something, feels something. It's go, go, go. As the child's brain develops, it discerns and reasons through what it's feeling, and we as parents mirror to teach them that, and that's what provides a child with the ability to go, not a good idea. I don't really want to do that. It takes those emotions, metabolizes them, and makes choices, okay? But remember, it doesn't know how to, the greatest child in the world and even the best parented child in the world does not have that ability when it's young, all right? So if we want to put that into the context of what they're seeing on the computer, this is a big deal because they are seeing things that are stimulating the feeling brain without access to the brakes of the thinking brain. Okay? All right, so if we kind of move on, viewing pornography can alter the brain's neural pathways and initiate an addiction that is often harder to overcome than drugs or alcohol. All right, now this is a really big deal because as I learn about this, I marvel at God's power, really. That within our own bodies, God has created for us this ability to regulate chemicals. So if we're struggling, we as a culture sometimes go to the pharmacy and pick up some medication to help us, all right? Now, here's the deal. This is pretty interesting, that our own body is equipped with all of the chemicals to regulate itself if we take good care of our bodies. Isn't that amazing? So just to give you a couple of examples, there's a chemical in our body called oxytocin. Oxytocin is what we feel through healthy connection. If I hug my child or hug my husband or a friend, they found it's like between 10 and 15 seconds even, I will feel, if I pay attention to it, a very calming effect. Have you guys ever noticed that? Pay attention to it. It is literally a chemical thing going on in our body that calms us, okay? Fantastic, beautiful thing, all right? Now, endorphins, just to give you a couple of examples, when we exercise, we release a huge amount of endorphins. The root of the word endorphin, if you think of it, is orphan, which is like morphine. Morphine is a painkiller. Our body produces its own painkiller when we exercise. So I don't know. This just is super cool to me. So our body knows how to take care of itself, okay? Dopamine is a very powerful chemical, okay? And it's not always bad. I'm going to use a good example. I have two dear friends right over here in the corner. They're my water skiing friends. They taught me how to water ski this summer. And I'm kind of obsessed with it a little bit. So every time I get a chance to be with these people and get on their boat, I have a huge dopamine rush. Dopamine is just a chemical that goes, this is awesome, and I want more. Where do I go to get it, and how quick can I get it again, okay? So dopamine is not bad. It's a reward chemical. It teaches us, this is good, how do I get more of it, and where do I go to get it, okay? So not a problem, okay? It's not a problem unless it's used inappropriately. Now with pornography, the deal is dopamine is the culprit, okay? When we flood our bodies and our brains specifically with dopamine through the use of pornography, we are flooding it with essentially 1,000 times more than you do with most just normal activities. So my water skiing would give me that kind of a rush, that times that by 1,000, which I can't even imagine because I feel pretty good when I water ski. But it's a big deal. It's very, very powerful, okay? So it is the reward hormone, all right? So basically our body has its own pharmacy that we can use for good, or we can use, and when I work with the folks that struggle with some sexual addiction issues, I talk about, you have an inner pharmacy and you have learned how to use that drug to self-soothe you because of a lot of attachment issues. And so the deal is we need to learn how to pull away from that, drug from the inner pharmacy and learn how to find that soothing and relief from other areas and from other relationships and things like that, all right? So this is the deal, though. Our children don't know what's going on. They have the gas, especially if they're exposed early. They don't have a capacity to put on the brakes. They don't even necessarily have the judgment to know what's going on. A lot of children will be exposed to something of a sexual nature, and these are not obviously bad children, but they are curious. Sexuality is something that is God ordained, and they don't have the information. They are curious, and a lot of kids I know have come back and said, well, I just didn't understand what it was, so I just needed to see it again. And accompany that with the rush of dopamine that hits them, and they return again because they just don't get it. And then pretty soon they're locked in. And so that's where we as parents need to be really aware that that is what is going on. All right? So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about filters in a minute, but the very most important thing, and I won't spend too much time on this because we've already talked about it, is filters are good, and we want filters, and we love filters, and we have filters in our house. But the most important thing that starts at the very beginning of life is secure attachment, right? Because we want to teach our children that if they are anxious or stressed or hurting or in pain or even angry, that they come to us and find soothing in relationship. That is by far the most important insurance against what can happen to us if we, when we become overwhelmed and don't feel like we have anyone to go to. And then we become very vulnerable to addiction. All right? And so along with secure attachment comes lots of dialogue, lots and lots of conversations, lots of talking, lots of repair. Lots of repair. My husband and I were walking out the door on Friday night to go out to dinner, and I thought of you, Scott, because I have my son with his weather thing. Remember I've talked about my son's weather anxiety that we're experiencing, and he was watching the weather, and he's like, Mom, how soon are you going to be back? There is like a tiny cloud up there, I'm like, oh. And I'm thinking, okay, I want to go out to dinner. I just don't see that there's going to be a rainstorm. And my son's like getting really frantic. And my husband's like, Valerie, 33%. Like, let's draw on that 67 tonight. Let's just go. Like, well, I don't know if that's how it works. But anyways, I was like, I'll be back if it starts to pour. Because I was pretty safe that we weren't going to be pouring. So anyways, okay, so moving on. So this is cool. When I was in this is when I was in the program that I just finished to become a specialist in this area. I was instructed to read a book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. I have it here. And it was the whole purpose of it was to teach me how to teach my children how to. It gives us a dialogue. It gives us a way to have a very, very good conversation with our children about this topic. And that's really, I think, a lot of times the main problem is it's like we know it's important. We just don't know exactly how to do it. And we don't know how much is too much. And we don't know what the right age is. And at least that was my issue. I was like, I don't know. So we were instructed to find some child or children that we cared about. And so, of course, I went to my two little boys, my 10 and 8-year-old sons, and we sat down and we talked about this. Now, I am going to briefly review some of the highlights of this. And I'm going to invite all of you with children to go and pick this up. It's on Amazon, and it's a wonderful book. So first of all, it defines what pornography is in a very age-appropriate way. It defines what addiction is in a very clear and clean and concise way. It talks about the feeling brain. So it normalizes what happens when, we want something, and it says that's okay. Like, that's how God made us. It talks about the thinking brain. In this context, it doesn't use sexuality. It's a little boy and a mom talking and having a conversation and looking at family vacation pictures and talking about how fun pictures are. And this is when the mom introduces, there are some bad pictures out there, and the little boy is very young, and he says, what do you mean? And so she introduces the topic that way. And then in looking at the context of the thinking and the feeling brain, she uses the example of when we want ice cream, and it's right before dinner. What does our feeling brain say to us? I know what it says to me. It's like, let's go for it. Let's just get the ice cream, right? We want it, right? And our thinking brain should say, let's wait till after dinner, right? And so Mom uses this sweet little example that resonates with this little boy to kind of help learn about the thinking and the feeling brain. And she talks about how these parts work together and how in children it's hard for the thinking brain to really do its job because it's not very developed. Then the book talks a little bit about the brain's attraction center. Now this is important enough that I kind of broke it down. If we could go to, I think it's maybe 4 slides ahead, and it says the brain's attraction center. So the explanation for this is that the brain's attraction center, and I love this is beautiful because it can be taught to a small child. And I was shocked, as a little side note, when I taught this to my little boys. My 10-year-old sat next to me and was quite engaged. My 8-year-old, we were sitting on the love seat in the living room, and he had, I can't remember if it was a toy car or an airplane, but it spun around and he ran around the room the entire time. And I thought, who knows, age appropriate. I'm not sure if I can really expect him. Well, he didn't appear to be listening, and I'll be darned if that little guy hasn't brought up the thinking brain and the feeling brain about 20 times. He'll be like, well, my thinking brain is doing this, but my feeling brain's doing this, Mom. And so he's bringing it up in context outside of the conversation that made me realize, children don't necessarily have the ability to sit still, but they are taking a whole lot in. And so I was really, really happy when I realized that this was actually something that resonated even with my younger child. All right, so back to the attraction center. The attraction center is part of the feeling brain. So if you remember this, it's part of the limbic system where we only experience feelings. It talks about how the attraction center is something that God created. It's something that draws men and women together. It's something that helps families happen in this life, and it is a good thing. It also talks about how the attraction center is much like the car's gas pedal, but that the attraction center in the brain cannot always tell the difference between pictures and real people. I thought that was really interesting. Also, that pornography turns on the attraction center in a child's brain before the thinking brain, or the brakes, is strong enough to understand how it is used. I just thought that was a really, really amazing way of looking at what's going on in the brain of a child. And my children, got it. We talked about it. And in this book, there's a section after each little mini chapter where you can talk about what I learned, where you can have a conversation with your child and say, so what is the, let's talk about what is addiction, and the child can kind of, go back and talk to you about that. And if we have these conversations and they have anything to do with ice cream at the end, the participation rate skyrockets, just in my house, so that's what we do. So when we talked about that, it helped at least contextualize, first of all, what pornography is, what addiction is, what's going on in the brain. It helped them learn what's going on in terms of the pull between, maybe if my husband and I have taught, oh, it's bad, I just personally don't feel like that's enough. They need to understand not only the sort of the theology around sexuality, but what is actually going on in the brain and how it impacts us and what we're feeling. It also sort of normalizes the curiosity. I don't want to instill in my children shame that they have curiosity around sexuality, because that just kind of almost opens up a whole other can of worms later on when we want them to have normal, healthy, God-ordained sexuality in their adult years. So we have to really have sort of a sense of how to manage it in a way that is helpful on multiple different levels. All right, so once I talked to my little boys about all of this and we went through the book, it proposes a little method of what to do when we see bad pictures. All right, and so what it's called the CanDo Method, and it just talks about close our eyes with the C, always tell a trusted adult, name it for what it is, distract myself doing something good, and order my thinking brain to be the boss. And when I was with my children, we were talking about it, we memorized this and we talked about it over and over again, and we played little games trying to remember what the CANDO are, and so it was lovely. It was really fun. I wasn't 100% convinced. You just never know, right? You don't know how much your kids are absorbing. Generally, I don't feel like they're absorbing almost anything. But I was going to get an A on the assignment, so I did my little thing. I did my write-up, and I was like, okay, good. Well, let me fast forward a little while. And let's move to the next picture with my little boys. So this is another one of my little guys, Lincoln and Drew. When a month or two passed by and Lincoln came to me, I will never forget, he came to me and he said, Mom, I think I saw something bad on the computer. And of course, your heart stops a little bit. I was grateful, and it was sweet because he's a big sports kid, and he was on ESPN. And he even explained what it was. It seemed fairly benign, but boy, I was grateful. I was so thank God that he came to me, that even what he saw worried him. And so I said, okay, buddy. And first of all, I said, thank you for coming to me, Lincoln. And I gave him a big hug. And I didn't even really know at that point what he'd seen, but my first and most important objective was that he understand that he was an all-star, I'm sure he was scared. I'm sure he was nervous. And he found me, and he came to me. And so we sat down, and I said, let's roll through the CanDo, buddy, and he's like, okay. And I said, what happened? And he said, well, I saw this, and I shut the computer. And I'm talking to you, and we talked about what he could do to distract himself. Of course, talking to me is a distraction, and I think we talked about maybe going out and playing, riding bikes or playing soccer or whatever. And then we talked about the thinking brain and the feeling brain. And it was great because we finished that little conversation, and I saw identity in my little boy. I saw a sense of, you know what? If I see this again, I know what I can do. I know where I can go. I know who I am. I know I'm precious and special. I'm not in trouble. I have an ally. And it was almost like a little test drive that he was competent to handle something, and he didn't have to do it alone. And so that was huge for me. And I'm really, really grateful for that experience. And I'm grateful for the tools I had, because I quite frankly don't know if I would have known how to handle this situation had I not been, by the grace of God, given this calling to work with people like this. And my husband and I have often said, whatever I'm able to do outside of my home will be an absolute bonus, but what I have, the work that I've been able to do in just with my own children has been enough. Everything else is just the cherry on top. Okay, let's turn our attention to the older kids, because boy, this is fun, and I'm being slightly sarcastic. All right, so I like to say this is a challenge not for the weak. I have two beautiful daughters that I've mentioned before, and I've got a picture of them again because we do spend. These are such cute girls, and my goodness, are they challenging for me. They are wonderful, and yet, I'm learning so much from them. Just to give you a little bit of context, gratefully, we didn't feel like we needed to give our kids phones super young. I'm really grateful for that, even without any sort of advanced training or whatever. So our girls, we decided we would give them phones when they turned 14, because that's when they started becoming very, very busy, and I needed access to them. Now, I could argue that that's even still too young. On some days, I do feel it's too young. I certainly don't feel like you need to go any younger. That's just my personal opinion. But the problem is the more immersed I became in the work that I did, the more I spent time falling in love with teenage clients who were struggling with sexual addiction, the more I started to feel like there were a few things that needed to happen in my own home that I needed to do better. Now, that is a problem when you have given your child a phone with very few restrictions and all of a sudden you start pulling back. So I would not recommend that, but maybe some of you are in this room and you're going to have to do that, which is fine. We're doing it and we're surviving. But for those of you with younger children, my strong recommendation would be get on board with your spouse, figure out what your plan is, and implement that from the very beginning. It will save you a lot of migraine headaches or whatever it is that happens to you when you get stressed out. I'm a migraine person. So, all right, so some of the things that we have come up with together, my husband and I, is we have desktop filters. So they're attached to the hard drive. We use the Circle, Disney Circle. I don't recommend it. I recommend it only because it's probably as good as they have, but honestly, there's nothing that's very good out there. My husband has looked deeply into filtering devices. Nothing will protect Google Images. Google just has its way that way, and that's a problem, right? So we can do what we can do, and we still have the Circle on there, but we are very well aware it's not very high quality. There's nothing that's better than just a good parent and computers in public places, especially when it comes to laptops. All right? We have found a handheld monitoring app called Guardian. I say we, but I really mean my husband, because he's done a lot of this work. He personally installed a number of apps on his own phone to test drive them and just see what happened. And he even tried to enter a few things in and see if they could get through. Guardian by far was the very, very best one that we have found, and it is installed on the phones. It's excellent. It's way better than anything you can find on a laptop computer. It prints out, my husband can get a printout of every single thing and every single URL that was Googled at any point in time on any of the phones, which is pretty awesome. And so, again, this does not replace parenting at all. But it does give us the protection to know what they're looking at. And it's nice that our children know that we know what they're looking at. It also has control over everything on that phone, meaning that we had a little bit of an issue with with both of them actually, because they were really resistant to this little program, shockingly. And they didn't like it, and there was some conflict, and so my husband and I opted to take the phones away for a while. Now, the problem is that starts to punish me as a mom, because I need to know where they are. So we discovered with the Guardian that you can actually turn everything off and make the phone a dumb phone. It was a thing of beauty. So any moment that I want to, we turn that phone into a dumb phone, and it becomes, it can make calls. That's all it does. Or I can make it so that it can, you can use the alarm. I mean, you can micromanage what that thing does. And sometimes we just go totally Amish, and the phone just disappears. It's gone. And that's okay too. They don't think so. I'd love if my daughters were here, you wouldn't be getting this experience. So, but But it's a really good thing for us. We've really liked it. We've instituted bedtimes. Those phones should not be, at least in our opinion, we have a family devotional every night before the children go to bed, where we read together and we pray together, and then the phones go on the counter. And that's the expectation. My husband and I have complete and total access to their phones. They do have passwords on them because and I know this is true, some of the kids with the sexting culture in the middle schools and high schools, they will take your phones and they'll get into the kids get into their friends' phones to be funny or whatever, and so there is good reason to have a password on your phone. But my husband and I know those passwords. It can't be a fingerprint, needless to say. So we've been through all these things, you can tell, right? I have lots of experience. And so we have access. Now, one thing I will say is if you get into the phone and you get them into apps, the Guardian app cannot control what's inside of an app. So as parents, we have to be very, very aware of what apps they have. We also have control over they cannot download an app without our downloading it through our parental password, okay? So that means for us that the big deal is Instagram for middle schoolers. We don't have any way to monitor Instagram. Instagram is not awesome. I don't really like it. I would rather my kids not have it at all. It does expose them to stuff. Even some of just the titles of things are very offensive. And so we monitor their Instagram, and we have had numerous conversations about what a friend is. Like, who gets access to our Instagram? What comes in? What goes out? And this is like an ongoing conversation of teaching our children that, yes, if you have 4,862 friends, that might seem awesome, but you don't know who these kids are, and what that also means is that you're getting all of their content. All right? So we choose wisely who we are friends with on Instagram, because with that friendship comes all of their content and all of their morals and all of their values and all of these things. So that's the other thing, is that any apps that they have, it's good for us as parents to know what's in those, what's going on in the apps, because you lose control of content once it goes through an app. If it goes straight through the internet, actually we have complete and total knowledge of it. All right, and then finally, in our home, phones are a privilege, not an entitlement. We have a thing that my church does called Family Home Evening every Monday night, and we have gospel lessons and games and treats, and it's a way that we gather with our family to teach them and have fun with them. We have lessons on entitlement about once a month because it's just an important lesson, I think, for children and middle schoolers to have, and high schoolers, that a lot of what they experience is a privilege, and it's not an entitlement, and that certainly is a very big deal around the culture of technology. And that we can take those phones anytime that we feel like we need to. And sometimes even when they can't concentrate and they're working on homework, but they're really not, those things disappear. They kind of go away. Now, I emphasize this. If this is all what I'm experiencing and what I'm explaining to you is really only effective if we have a securely attached relationship with our children. Because needless to say, if you don't, this can come so between you and become such a wedge in the relationship that it's going to be counterproductive, and it's going to destroy the relationship. So to that I would say lots of repair, lots of conversations, lots of explanations, and also as a mom, I can't get wrapped up in the anger of it. Not to say I don't sometimes, because I do, but I have to be very careful that my daughters understand that I love them, and I still love them, and even though I'm going to be parenting them, and I'm not going to, and I often say this, especially to my 14-year-old, I am not going to be very popular with you right now. I'm just not. And I understand that you don't like what I'm doing. I get that. I get that you're upset. I'm actually mirroring her anger. Kind of makes her more angry. But I just say, I know that this is hard, and I know that none of your friends do this, and none of their parents do this, and I'm mean. And yet, I always just kind of go back to, listen, I work with a lot of kids who are just as good as kids of you. And they are struggling in a very deep and dark place because they are stuck in some addiction issues. And I just want to keep you guys safe. And so that's kind of what I would say is to keep, and that's why the securely attached relationship has to happen from the first day of their life, because this is here. Technology isn't going anywhere. It's the way our kids, it's the way, friends have always been important. They were just as important to us as they are to them. It's just this is the way it's being done now. And so we have to navigate it, and we have to navigate it well, and it starts with a really healthy relationship. I already mentioned a couple of these issues. Secure attachment, start early with the guidelines, accept that resistance is normal. I often try really hard to make repairs with my children. Not that I repair like, I'm going to give you back all these things that I feel like. I stand by the way I feel regarding what I let them have and what they don't have, but I will make any repairs in terms of if I handled something incorrectly, if I get angry, and I will definitely validate their frustration. I won't change my mind, but I validate their frustration. And there have been occasions where we've backed off. There was one time where there's a control on the Guardian that turns everything off at a certain hour, and it wasn't very realistic. And so my husband and I talked about it, and we changed it. We changed the time. We were like, yeah, you're probably right. You probably need that for now. So we've done that a few times, and it's really good for them to see us doing that, so they see that there is, on some level, some power, because that's what these kids want when they're adolescents, and that they understand that there's a dialogue, that we will win a lot of these battles simply because we're protecting them, but we don't need to win all of them. All right. I will be brief on this one because as I was driving here and thinking about this church community seems to do a fantastic job on this, so I don't think I have to spend a lot of time on this. But I do feel like in many ways, as church communities, it's very important for us to be proactive. Like, we need to be having conversations about this. We need to be talking about how God ordained sexuality as part of his plan. It's a pretty darn important part of his plan. And so we need to normalize it. We need to make sure that our youth understand, contextually, it's a contextual thing. It has to do with when, where, how. But it's not all bad. And I think sometimes we refuse to have a conversation, and then by so doing, our children are needing to get that information and they go elsewhere. The kids need this information. If they don't get it from us, they are getting it somewhere. If we aren't doing it in the home, they're finding it from their friends. They're finding it from the internet. They're finding it somewhere. And so we need to start in our homes. We need to mentor that and let it kind of trickle into what's happening in the community. We need to, as church members, we need to be having bold conversations, and kudos to you, Pastor Scott, because you're doing a great job. So that's why I'm like, I don't even know if I should, but because you're doing a good job. And you guys that are all in here, you're in here because it's important to you, and you're willing to have the hard conversations. And so, my hat's off to each of you. I'm very honored to be with you. Finally, a couple of things. We are, in the community, I'm involved in a couple of events that have to do with helping raise our children in ways that are safe and healthy. This is going on here at the end of the month. It's September 30th and October 1st through Heartland Community Church, and I will be one of the speakers, one of the presenters. I think Todd Fry is a friend of the church, and I'm certainly he's a Nazarene, and he is the keynote speaker at this event. And so I just put that up there just so that it's open to all. It's a community event. So we're hoping to get as many churches and congregations of every flavor there, because this is a common battle that we are all involved in. And so I wanted to make sure you were aware of that. And then I wanted to close, if I could, before I definitely want to have time for our small group, because that's my favorite part. I wanted to close by sharing with you something that has struck me as I've been studying this. I want to take you to one of my favorite stories, and I'm going to paraphrase because we're short on time, but one of my favorite Bible stories that often has resonated with me when I'm struggling or when I feel like a battle is large. It comes from the second book of Kings, chapter 6, and if you guys remember, it's the story where Elisha is struggling. He's got a very formidable enemy before him. And they're having some conversations, and the enemy is gathering their troops, and they're coming in to attack. And in this particular section, about halfway through chapter 6 of 2 Kings, he has a little servant, a young man, who I remember as even a child thinking about this, it touching me very deeply, because I think as a child I was thinking of the servant as being a young boy. And Elisha is aware that this is happening, and he's not paying attention. And the story takes the young servant to the window, and he sees an army approaching. And it talks about chariots and a large group coming on. And he turns to Elisha and he says, "What are we going to do?" Like, we're overwhelmed. And I think about that when sometimes I think about what we are being confronted with in this society with this particular issue. It almost feels a little bit overwhelming. And it feels as if Satan has a lot of power. And he looks out the window and he's overwhelmed. It says this, And when the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth, behold, a host compassed the city both with horses and chariots. And his servant said unto him, Alas, master, what shall we do? And this is Elisha speaking. He says, Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes, that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. And that is my feeling today as we come together as this small little community of believers. That even though this is a battle, and it is a large battle, and one that we need to take seriously, they that be with us are greater than they that be with him. We know who's going to win this battle. We know how this is going to end. We know that God is going to win. We just have the responsibility and the stewardship, I feel, to be reminded of and to be mindful that we have a battle before us and that God will uphold us and he will help us in this fight. And I share these things with you. In our Lord's name, amen.